Welcome r/EntitledParents. You're getting married? But what about my cruise? So this story doesn't involve me too much, but I know quite a lot about X actions and behavior through stories family members and GC told me. Ever since we were little kids, my cousin, GC, and I have been best buds. We lived only a few miles away from one another, so we would bike to each other's houses, play in our backyards, and play video games. GC comes from an extremely wealthy family. Her dad, my uncle, started a business when he was 20, and it has been super successful to the point there are now several large locations across the globe. Even though this family is crazy rich, they live a very modest lifestyle. They live in a small, two-story home on a few acres of land and a large pond takes up most of it. The one lavish thing they do is that every 2 or 3 years, they go on a cruise. GC is one of 3 children. She has an older brother and her identical twin sister, Ek. You may think the good twin, evil twin scenario is only seen on the TV screen, but GC and Ek are the real world equivalent. GC is kind and generous, while Ek selfish and entitled. Ek always had this idea in her head that, because her dad was so wealthy, she didn't have to lift a finger in life to get what she wanted. Good things just came to her, GC, and their brother, but GC had the common sense to know that she can't always rely on dad's money. Despite getting pretty much everything they wanted growing up, GC and her brother never had entitled attitudes. Their parents are also super nice, so Ek was always the evil standout of the family. Ek's attitude only got worse as time went on. Eventually, Ek got married and had a kid, a boy. Ek's husband is just as nasty as she is, so they were kind of made for each other. Ek always wanted to rub her child in GC's face like she wanted, gloat about having a kid before she did. GC had a history of bad relationships including those that involved verbal and physical abuse. One time, she came to her sister for advice after her boyfriend beat her. Ek had the nerve to blame her weight and not using makeup to make herself more attractive. GC was afraid to date anyone after her last relationship disaster, but that changed when she finally met the man of her dreams, GH. I met GH personally, and he's a giant teddy bear of a guy. He's the perfect guy to help heal GC's old wounds and give her the loving, happy life she deserves. Then, nearly 2 years after they met, GC and GH were engaged. The entire family was thrilled that GC finally got the man of her dreams and her father wanted to throw a boatload of money to her to help pay for a beautiful wedding. For future reference, he did the same thing for Ek when she got married, yet Ek was not happy about how extravagant GC's wedding was going to be. GC wanted to be married at Niagara Falls and invite basically everyone she knew, and her father was going to pay for pretty much all of it. Ek was furious. She talked to GC and their father about the wedding and how all the money being spent better not interfere with the family's upcoming cruise. Yes, they still went on cruises together every few years despite the children being grown and having families of their own. Their father said that, because of the wedding and how expensive it was going to be, the family cruise would have to be pushed back another year or 2. Ek practically exploded. She blamed GC for taking the cruise away from her and her precious boy who was 5 at this point. She said she told her son how they were going on a cruise and how now he's going to be so upset now because his selfish aunt wanted to get married instead of giving him a happy week in the tropics. Ek even had the audacity to demand GC to reschedule the wedding for next year so they could go on the cruise instead. GC, who is normally not a confrontational person, had it with her sister's attitude and told her if she wanted to go on a cruise, she would have to pay for it herself. Ek and her husband were nowhere near as wealthy as their father and there was no way he was going to reschedule his own daughter's wedding just to give Ek what she wanted. Ek's ranting went on for weeks, flipping back and forth between blaming her sister for ruining her son's year and begging her father for money to go on a cruise because she and her family deserved it. She drove GC to tears and she ended up calling me up for advice. My only advice to her was to give Ek, who normally gets everything, nothing, and by nothing, I mean don't invite her to the wedding. Like most sisters would do, GC wanted Ek to be one of her bridesmaids as she was a bridesmaid at Ek's wedding. Not inviting her would be a major upset for everyone involved, but it just may be the thing to teach Ek a lesson. So she did just that. GC called up her sister and flat out told her that if she didn't change her attitude, she didn't want it leaving a sour taste at her wedding. Again, Ek blew up shouting at GC, calling her all sorts of names, and again blaming her for the cruise being cancelled. GC hung up and decided to not invite her to the wedding. The wedding was amazing, and I ended up being the bridesmaid to take Ek's place. Yes, I was invited to the wedding originally, but GC didn't want me to be a bridesmaid, only because she knew I hated dresses and I'd rather wear a suit, but I said I'd wear a dress, just for her special day. It's been a few years now, and GC and GH have a beautiful little girl, and have a baby boy on the way. Ek is still in their lives, and is still nasty as ever, but she doesn't come to her father begging for anything anymore, because after her behavior towards him and GC, he threatened to leave her out of his will if she continued to pester either of them. Maybe now that she's not going to get everything handed to her on a silver platter, she'll change her attitude for the better, or at least that's what we all wish to happen. Only the bride wears white on her wedding day. Wearing white, as a woman, specifically usually, to someone else's wedding, is considered bad taste and a shitty move. This is the bride and groom's day, not anyone else's. This is the day where the bride is supposed to be the center of attention, the most beautifully dressed and gorgeous person there. It's the day where every eye is on her, the day that her husband takes one look at her and thinks she looks more beautiful than he's ever seen her. The one day in their lives that it's all about her, him, and them as a couple. Not only did they spend all this money and time to throw this wedding, but the bride has spent hundreds, if not thousands of dollars just on her appearance alone. The dress, makeup, hair, flowers, veil, heels, waxing, maybe a tan, everything she's paying for and going through to make sure that she feels like all eyes are on her and her new husband only has eyes for her. But the issue with wearing white in particular is that white is supposed to symbolize the bride's purity and devotion to her groom. Not to mention, helps her stand out. Only the bride is supposed to wear white at her wedding. Wearing white to another woman's wedding is not only taking a large part of what's supposed to be the bride and groom's day, mainly the bride's, and making it about you, but literally is meant to take the focus away from the bride entirely. And a bridesmaid doing that is even worse, because she's up there standing next to the bride, with all eyes on her ruining the view and photos for the bride. Not to mention that most bridesmaids have dresses specifically picked out by the bride for the wedding. So now she's also purposefully going against what the bride is asking/expecting, just to get attention on the one day it's inappropriate to fight for it. Does that make sense? I'm not sure if I explained it perfectly. I'm glad GC put the smack down. I also have a GC and Ek, not twins, but a few years apart, and they only have each other as siblings. Their parents were divorced about 20 years ago in a nightmare divorce, and are still not on speaking terms. We don't think the mom is even going to show for wedding. GC is getting married in 2020, and has given Ek ample time in advance for traveling plans. Ek lives on the other side of the country. Ek told GC I'll come for the wedding, but I have to leave right after. The wedding is really cutting into my PTO, and I need time for my vacation. Sad thing is I don't even think Ek is happy for GC. She isn't showing her any support, and is really put out by the whole thing. It's okay though, me and the other GCs are smothering her with love and attention. She will get the spectacular wedding she deserves. Her husband is a big jerk, but not as bad as she is. I can sometimes manage to have a good conversation with him, but never Ek. She's just a bitch about everything. They're kiddies, okay. He can be bratty sometimes, but he has more common sense than his mom, and has a better attitude. He also knows when to stop when told to by an adult. I recently took him, GC's kid, and my other's cousin's young boy to a local place that has arcade games, indoor go-karts, and other cool things. He loves his little cousins and they played and ate ice cream together. I've only seen him act up at family parties and his mom just lets him do it. I think I actually put the fear of God into him one time because I yelled at him for throwing rocks at a goose that was in the yard. Apparently I have the right amount of angry mom tone in my voice that he learned to not act up around me anymore lol. My wife did something similar. After years of her mom being abusive physically and emotionally, singling her out over her siblings and whatnot, and same shit on her father's side, we told her parents that a family friend would be giving her away at our wedding, and they went ballistic. We ended up not inviting any of her family, her decision, and one of her bridesmaids was uninvited, as well as her best friend of 7 years. Does this sound like something people would like to have elaborated on? There's more to it, but I don't want this comment to be a whole ass book. Good for GC for standing up for herself. And for the father as well. Seriously. Cut that bitch off. Ek has got to get her head out of her ass. If my sister was that abusive, I'd straight up disown any relationship with her whatsoever. That's just far too selfish, nasty, toxic, and unapologetic. In all seriousness, I do hope Ek comes to her senses, realizes what a douche she's been, and apologizes. I may be hoping for the impossible, but that family really deserves to have the drama cease and desist.